Welcome to Weekly Wins and Losses. My name is James Hepner, former real estate entrepreneur turned self-development hacker, coach, and fulfillment strategist. Each week, we bring you a thought to wrestle with that'll help you live fully alive and gain more life. Real life is made up of both wins and losses. Both were designed for your good. That's basic reality. Without facing and learning how to embrace your losses for greater gain, you miss out. You leave 50% of your life experience on the table. So with that, let's begin the show.
With inflation rates rising, interest rates shooting up, gas prices skyrocketing, and the continued global unrest, it's easy to find what's wrong in the world. Tony Robbins says, what's wrong in the world is always available, but so is what's right. Instead of trying to hope and wish the world into a better place, it's time to make the most important decision any of us can ever make, and that is to invest in yourself. Now, you know I've always stood with you as you've navigated the uncertainties of life's reality. However, it's now time that I step up and take decisive action to walk alongside your current life journey in a new way, and that is by making myself available to you in a radical, new way during these challenging times. So for a limited time, I'm inviting you to a 45-minute strategic business life consultation. No charge and no strings attached. This consultation is where you'll regain the reins of your life. It's where you'll gain clarity on exactly why you're stuck, moving you directly towards your optimal outcomes. And I'll be honest, and I'm humbled to say, however, my clients' generous reflection of their time spent with me reveals the truth. The skills they've been able to master in such a short period of time by engaging in our one-on-one strategic sessions have changed their lives in so many ways. This is the only invitation that I can fathom that will put my skin in the game of your life in such a way that will allow us, you and I, to address your specific needs with precision and excellence. 45 minutes, just you and I, together on one call to get you headed in the direction you crave most. Here's what my clients report after one-on-one sessions with me. A decrease in indecision. An increase in clarity, confidence, and courage. An increase to fully capitalize on what's directly before them. An increase in the impact that they crave to have at work, on their families, and inside their communities. A decrease in pain and suffering. A decrease in anxiety. So, if you want to move beyond old stories, get clear in where you're headed so that you can shake your world, then here's a rich opportunity for you today. One-on-one strategic business life consultation with me. One-on-one 45 minutes. So, if you want to maximize this opportunity, if you want to reclaim and regain your inner power, then you're going to want to slow things down during these challenging times. And how? Well, engaging and getting right with your life and making a life plan. I should let you know that this offer will fill up and expire. Click in the show notes to get your 45-minute strategic business life consultation. No charge, no strings attached. May this episode change your everyday life.
Welcome, friends. And today I have with us someone that I've been waiting to have on. Why? Weekly wins and losses. We talk all about the perception of failure. We talk about what it feels like, not only when we fail, but when it goes beyond just feeling and we realize actually this is not the way we thought it was going to turn out. And so Alyssa, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
Yeah, Alyssa Cox, ladies and gentlemen, she's the founder of Blue Swift Consulting, and she's a respected organizational effectiveness strategist with 14 years of experience helping organizations. And what's interesting is college organizations, professional, like corporate, unlock these different types of organizations, unlock that latent potential in workforces by taking advantage of, oh, I like this so much, of the unrealized opportunities built, into everyday practices. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. And who doesn't want to know how you can unlock the untapped potential in everyday practices. There's stuff waiting for us right there.
It's like habit layering, right?
Mm.
Like if you can take the thing you're already doing, make a 5% or a 5-degree pivot and be way more effective, why wouldn't you want to do that?
What had you drop into this work? Was it that you felt like a failure every day? Was it that sorry?
I don't think I want to get into it. I felt like a
No,
failure every day. Thanks.
but but seriously, what was it? Like for me, weekly wins and losses, the reason that I dropped into the platform and I created it, became a founder of this, let's dive into what it feels like to win. Let's dive into what it feels like to lose. And then somewhere in between, let's bring all this tension together, all not to convert it into the negative into positive or positive into something different, but just let it be and let it be for the game that was all designed to be. We have to get curious. So for me, I had something in my life that had me want to stretch into and beyond my current thresholds of control. I wanted to, I needed to, I had to. My life, my marriage, my children, my business, everything depended on it. Tell us, what is it about you that had you go, yep, I'm going to talk about this little thing called failure and how to maximize it?
So I love working, right? Like I love being part of a team that's accomplishing things. I love the building and the growing.
Hmm.
And as I look back at the times when I've been able to build and grow the most, it's when I've been sort of given an opportunity to do something I had no idea how to do, and then had the leadership support behind me to when I kind of screw it up, or when things don't go the way I wanted them to go, or the way they should have gone. Like when I make a mistake, whatever language you want to put around having a failure, my leadership was there to prop me up and help me fix it. And too often I've been in other situations where that's not the case, where we're terrified of failure. And so we really like lock down what we're willing to try, what we're willing to let our people try. I mean, when you think about micromanagers in your life and leaders who have their hands on your work all the time, a lot of that is fueled by this fear of failure and this unwillingness or inability to think about and have a healthy relationship with failure and with risk. And so that's how I got into this work, is that, if I can evangelize some of these practices that can not only unlock your personal growth, but also unlock the growth of your team, make you a better leader, make you a better manager of people is almost too reductive, but a better grower of leaders, then we all stand in a position to do so much more and accomplish so much more. And so that's what really gets me up in the morning. And what I found is that there are things that you're doing today that you're not even aware of, and a small pivot can make all the difference in the world. So I'm not asking people to wake up and put on a whole new face. I'm asking us to think critically about our habits, and where in specific instances are we able to make that small change to unlock real outsized potential.
Seems to me that there's two types of people in the world. There's many types, but just for simplicity today, it seems to me that in both types have one thing in common. They both make choices, and the choices that they make look a bit like this. The one group of people says, we're going to, and you use the term choosing our inability. And so one group of people chooses the inability to see failure for what it is. And it's a gift. All things in life are a gift. How so? We have to discover, we have to get curious. We have to develop the art of going deeper. We have to not feel like everything is one big threat to our survival or even our thriving nature. So the one group chooses their inability. The other group chooses their ability. And what's fascinating is, I think often it's a choice, because here's the thing. I think we all have all of which we have need of. We already have it. When we were born, we were given it. Some people, they talk about, you ask them, so what will life be like when you succeed level X, whatever, and they have this projected outcome. And they're like, it'll just be amazing. It'll just be amazing. And then you ask them, so So arrival is a place that you're waiting for and you're creating. And they're, well, yeah, we're not where we want to be. I say, well, we get this, we understand. The only thing is, Alyssa, when you consider, the talks that you do for colleges, corporations, right? I'm sure you see this all the time. Who isn't waiting for their day of arrival? And in reality, I think we can all wrestle with the concept of what is arrival. And I think when we were born, we were given all things we had need of. We had it all. We just need to remember it. And so we need to choose our ability versus choosing to dig our, head, bury your head in the mud, and dip it in the sound on the way out. And then say, well, we don't have an ability. When in reality, we must get curious. Tell me, when you talk to these audiences, what comes to heart? You see, in people's mind, likely the resistance to believing that maybe they have an ability. What has you unlocked? Because you as a speaker, you as a as a facilitator, you can only take them so and so far. You have to have them want to see that they can flip to the next layer, which is, I have the ability. So talk to us. What do you do? How do you help people in that state?
Part of it is framing. A lot of times we talk about risk inclination, risk aversion, and people will see themselves as part of a larger context, as part of an organizational context and an organizational culture, and they'll fall back on, well, I want these things, but if my leaders don't want these things, if my corporate culture isn't set up for people to be risk inclined, people to lean into failure, people to fail forward, people to learn and grow, then what can I possibly do? Mm-hmm. And I have a lot of sympathy for that perspective. I've certainly felt it before, but research has shown that psychological safety, and right, psychological safety is really key to psychological safety is our feeling that we're not going to be criminalized for bringing a perspective. We're not going to be criminalized for bringing feedback. We're not going to be criminalized for participating and for taking risks. Psychological safety is built on our immediate teams. And so if you're feeling like, empathizing first with, I get it, your corporate culture, this is how everybody works. I understand. I've been there, I've seen it. But the reality is you don't interact with everyone in your organization every day. And the changes that you make on your personal team, right? The people that you do have within your sphere, those people are 80 to 90% of your work interactions. They're 80 to 90% of your work growth. They're 80 to 90% of your potential on any given day. And so while all this stuff is happening in the world, whether it's the broader world or your corporate world, refocusing in on what are the behaviors that you can have, what are the changes that you can make personally with just your team, that's where psychological safety is built. And that's where you can start to make a difference. And that difference, you accrue those benefits personally. So it's reframing from the abstract and from the large and the out of our control to what is within our control.
Seems to me that the human doesn't take a step forward until the human feels safe.
This is true.
You bring anything to the human experience without a certain degree of certainty. It doesn't need to be 100% certain, but just without a certain degree of, and you speak about what we have control over, focusing there. That's what brings us certainty. You bring safety and the human says, now I might want to entertain something different.
I think that it's, you see this with kids, right? And how do you create a mentality of supported risk-taking with your kids? How do you create an environment where they understand that they don't have to do everything that's 100% safe? That they're supported, like they climb up onto a big rock and they're like, I'm stuck, I can't get down. You as a parent lift them up and bring them down? Or do you say, you got up there, you're gonna make it down, I'll stand here so that if you fall, I'll catch you. But you need to now look for the handholds and take those risks yourself. This is supported risk taking. And this is where kids, and it works with adults too, right? This is where we as humans try something new with the security that we are we're harnessed, that with the security that we are supported and that failure isn't going to be catastrophic.
That's a fascinating play. I love that. And I take copious notes. And so when you're talking, things come up and I just reframe and I reflect on it. But you were talking about, supporting or creating these supportive risk areas in, the lives of not only our children, but even for ourselves. And it seems to me that, and of course, children, you look at the infrastructure of children, they lean on their parents, they lean on a base note. And I think when we really level up, we come to the realization that we're all actually leaning on something, even though we're adults and we're seniors. I'm not senior yet.
I'm not seeing, what are you insinuating? I don't appreciate this line of questioning at all.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, I'm just wearing a toupee today.
Every day, and I'm a senior citizen. How is this going to work?
But we all need, and back to the certainty thing, but we need to stand on this infrastructure that we reckon is going to be able to support our weight. If nothing else, support us from the moment, right? In our home, we have this little thing where we actually create a safe environment for our children to disobey. Because children will want to stretch their wings. Now, we don't teach our kids what to think, we teach them how to think. And so if you don't create a safe environment for your children to disobey, they're going to go and do it anyway. So why not instead leave them space in the home to disobey in certain areas? So create these support mechanisms so that they reckon that disobeying, and again, society, we think disobeying, that's right or wrong, good or bad. But really what it ends up being, just thinking about my children, and listeners, if you think about if you have children or when you were a child, it isn't that you're trying to be a complete arsehole to your parents. You're just breaking away and you're developing your own way of living. So you're sampling different constructs and you're trying this on, you're trying that on. So through experience, I think when we take the seriousness out of the moment, we get to experience the moment. And when we get to experience the moment, what we end up realizing is it's something for us just to take in. And when we take in that it is like my children, when they take in that they're trying something, but they realize that when something doesn't work out, meaning when they go into the workforce and something doesn't work out, their boss says, the person they're working with says, you have X amount of leeway, and they go sample that and they realize they go a little beyond what the comfort level was of the CEO. And they bring this, I think ultimately what we all want to develop within us is how do we observe within ourselves and the people that we work with and the support mechanisms that we have, those people, how do they really view failure? Is it that they have us on a leash and they're going within these parameters, but then as soon as we go a little beyond or a little under that, they jerk it and they make us realize it's not safe at all? Or is it that they have this undertow of, you know what, to be honest, like you were saying, creating supportive environments, supported throughout this whole experience, that these individuals, us as parents, that these people, they actually have a worldview about risk that says, we look at this as an opportunity to individualize, not to compartmentalize, not to say risk is this. We look at the person who comes in front of us and we observe, who is this individual? How do they show up in the world? And though it may be that I have flavor and appetite for risk level X, this individual is coming to me and is showing me that he or she is comfortable playing here. And it actually draws us into being like, oh, okay, so how could I support this person? And is this beyond the level that is of comfort? Because let's be honest, innovation comes when we turn that fear mechanism into opportunity, when we stop empathizing with problem and we start empathizing with opportunity. So I think it's almost an individual, but speak to that a little bit, because before I actually speak to that, and I want to ask you about an experience, but if you think about when you talk to larger audiences, how do you embrace speaking to the individual unique to who they are and not to compartmentalize and make them all feel like they should fit into this certain mold, that they assess their risk critically within their own individual needs?
Absolutely. And so I think a lot of this variation, you can see a lot of people bring this variation to the table. if we think about, right, the Myers-Briggs introvert extrovert scale.
Mhm.
And when we talk about psychological safety and your willingness to speak up, your willingness to provide feedback, your willingness to provide ideas, a lot of people look at that and say, well, if you're an extrovert, then you're going to be talking all the time. Like, that's what extroverts do. You talk all the time. Who even knows what you're saying? Like, I'm so tired of listening to you guys. I'm an introvert and I'm going to speak when I have something to say, maybe, and I'm going to do it quietly. That's a question of presentation, not a question of safety. And so when we talk about psychologically safe environments, these are places where we're assessing suggestions, we're evaluating suggestions, we're evaluating work, we're providing feedback. And when people do speak up, they're not worried that they're going to get pushback personally, right? And when I say personally, their ideas may receive pushback, but the conversation is going to be grounded in the work. They may receive feedback on their personal effectiveness, but we're not talking about sort of this individual's value as a human being. We're talking about the way this person shows up in a presentation, and we're providing feedback that is constructive to help improve the work, right? When we're able to have conversations that are anchored in the work, it creates an environment where we may have more talkative extroverts, we may have quieter introverts, but the availability of, or the access to contribution in psychologically safe environments, the access is higher no matter who you are. And coming up with an understanding, and when I work with people one-on-one, right, we talk about this, it's thinking about where have you contributed in the past? Where have you spoken up in the past? And what was it that made that comfortable? What was it that made that successful? Everyone's going to have their own style. And so when I speak to larger groups, it's asking people to do this exercise, which is think about a time when speaking up worked for you in the past. Think about a team that had a high level of psychological safety. What was it about that team that worked for you personally? And what was it about the way you showed up on that team that made you really effective? The answer to that question can be different depending on who you are, but the key is to identify what worked for you and then look to replicate those situations, look to replicate the environment where you can have those behaviors again, whether it's working with your boss to create a better environment, whether it's rethinking your contribution to conversations and keying in on certain sort of emotional balances or certain areas or certain thought patterns around the subject matter. We all, if you've ever been part of a psychologically safe environment where you could contribute and you could fail and you could get support and you could help work forward, we all want to go back there, right? We all want to work in that space more because it's a space where we don't have to be defensive, where we don't have to spend our energy protecting ourselves. And so that is a pretty universal feeling. And when I speak to large groups where we do have differences in personality, differences in team dynamics, asking people to come and take a moment and exercise a practice of introspection and exercise a practice of self-identification for what works for you, and then lean into what works for you personally, that I find resonates pretty well.
Alyssa, lean into an experience, take our listeners, take us all back inside your life. If you could, and if you'd be willing to, share a story of when you were quite risk adverse, but life just kept coming. Share with us, if you could, something like that, and give us the synopsis, give us the play-by-play, like show us how you were gently invited, and or maybe very firmly invited to now be risk inclined, because this is just share with the listeners, with us.
And what comes to mind here is not one particular experience, but I can tell you that I have historically had a ton of anxiety around performance appraisals. Like, I'm waiting tables, like doing banquet service at a hotel, and they decided they were going to do performance evaluations, and I'm having like heart palpitations. I do a good job. I'm a good waitress. I'm having heart palpitations going into this review because I have no idea what they're going to say. And all I can do is, and I like lean into this like negative self-talk and negative sort of introspection. This is a really consistent pattern for me. And it's just like, it's terrifying. Like, I'm sure that I'm going to go in and I'm just going to sort of be personally accosted by my reviewer. And it never happens that way. Like, it's not a thing.
But in your mind, it is a thing. It's a real thing. They say the mind can't, yeah, right. The mind can't detect the difference between a real experience and a perceived. Go ahead.
That's right. And so it took me a long time. And honestly, like, actual experience has no bearing, for me, had no bearing on my ability to sort of overcome this fear of the performance appraisal. Mm-hmm. Because my real experience was always very positive. Do I have developmental areas? Yeah, of course I do. And if my boss isn't identifying those areas, it's a pretty terrible, from a quality perspective, performance appraisal. Like, what am I supposed to be working on? Mm-hmm. But they were all very, very positive, very forward-looking, very productive, very constructive. So again, experience was not going to help me get over this hump. What helped was sitting back and saying, do I know something that I've done right? Do I know what I've done wrong? Do I know, and maybe not done wrong, but do I know where I need to develop? Coming up with ahead of time, almost like a personal performance evaluation, and trying to be balanced. If I was going to deliver a performance evaluation to my people, it wouldn't be nearly as brutal as the performance evaluation I'm giving myself in my mind. So let me bring to myself the same balance that I give to others, and that honestly has always been my experience in performance appraisals. Taking a minute and reframing personally has made all the difference in the world. And when I was able to reframe, then what I found was, when I'm sitting in performance evaluations or performance conversations, I don't get as hot, right? Like, I'm not as stressed. I'm not having this sort of panic, and I'm hearing better. I'm better able to take in what you're telling me and just think critically, and not personalizing things, right? But think critically about the feedback I'm receiving, the specific instances where it may have elicited that feedback, or the specific examples. And I get to ask questions, because I'm not trying to protect myself. I'm now trying to understand. I can ask questions in my performance evaluation or in this feedback session. I can really try to understand what's being said to me, understand where this feedback is coming from, help me understand with a couple of examples. And think about how I adjust my behavior moving forward. And when I was able to reframe the performance conversation for myself as a constructive conversation about what I need to do next, as opposed to this retrospective crucifixion. I have no idea. I was terrified. Mm-hmm. I was better able to manage my emotions going in, and I was better able to take on any kind of constructive criticism I was getting, or any kind of feedback I was getting, and actually act on it. Mm-hmm. And it has made a big difference in terms of not just my own performance, my personal growth, but also my relationship with the people who are giving me feedback.
Mm-hmm. Isn't it such an interesting play how it seems that many of us have a highway built out of self-criticism, and we have a dirt road of self-awareness. Self-awareness, being critical of oneself, those are two different things. Some people are like, no, I'm very aware, but really when you listen, they're very self-critical, right? And so when I think to your point on thinking critically, there's always two sides to all things. Two sides. There's benign and there's hostile. I think about if one doesn't make either one of those safe. So the benign side is often, the safe side. It's the loving side. The hostile is the, whoa, I don't know if I want this one. Some people say it's more negative, it's more dark. And here's what's interesting. Both of these sides, benign and hostile, brings us into tension. So the gift of the polar opposite is they allow us to think critically if we like. And again, there's to the point on, back what I was saying earlier, choosing your ability versus choosing your inability. Choosing your inability leans into performance anxiety, because what it comes to the not awareness of, but that criticizing voice, it just deducts that maybe it's not good enough. Maybe it won't be able to finish, right? They say, for example, men with erectile dysfunction, most of that is not erectile dysfunction. Most of that is actually just performance anxiety, meaning, will I have what it takes to deliver? Will I have what it takes to deliver? Will I have what it takes to deliver? And I think that nuance that you just brought a little while ago, to be balanced, what does balance look like in the benign and hostile? It's to let both shine. Why do we feel like we just want to see the safe, benign, the lovely side? There's no life if it's just that. We're not seeing clearly what is. And so we all want to see clearly what is out there, but we first must see clearly what is in here. Because when we see clearly what is in here, now all of a sudden, if other people respond in certain ways, then we can initiate without having to wrap ourselves around their way, and at the same time still be super empathetic. We're not negotiating with ourselves, but we are actually just allowing this all to spin towards that self-awareness place that you talked about. Talk to us, what is it actually, in your mind, what does it mean to fail? What does failure mean?
So I use the term failure because it's inflammatory, right? Because it elicits an emotional response.
So it's the hostile for most people. There you go.
It's the thing that didn't go so hot, right? A lot of times we think of success and failure as being either 100% good or 100% bad. Failure is not necessarily catastrophic failure. Catastrophic failure is certainly a kind of failure. But there are lots of ways every day that we can look at what we've done and how we performed, and we can identify areas, things that didn't go so hot or things that we could have done better. And when we overemphasize the things that could have gone better to the exclusion of the things that went well and the successes that we have garnered, the things that we did accomplish, then we start to build a really fearful and negative self-image, which is not accurate. I mean, I was recently involved in a planning solution deployment, and the objective here, we started out in spreadsheets. The objective was to deploy this solution that was going to through a system aggregate information across the globe and improve transparency for those who wanted to go in and like slice and dice the numbers. You didn't have to go ask Adam for his spreadsheet anymore. And any of these kinds of projects has its challenges. The master data isn't always clean. I would almost go so far as to say it's never clean. The mechanics that we've put into the system, maybe the math is a little clunky. Sometimes maybe the math is wrong and we're catching that. Other people are catching it during testing. It's embarrassing. You're asking them to test something and they see something that's wrong and it feels embarrassing. We finally get to a place where we're ready to release. And it's not perfect, but it's pretty good. But the team that I'm working with, and in particular my finance partner, was very down in the mouth about it. He's like, I feel like we should have been, with all the time we put into this, we should have been better. We shouldn't have these problems. And I was like, yeah, maybe, but it's never perfect. And it's never perfect the first time you release. And let's take a step back and remind ourselves that what we've done is we've got a guy who used to spend a half a day every single week monkeying with spreadsheets and field all kinds of emails over the course of the week, asking him to go back into that spreadsheet and pull data, all of that work, all of that time that he spent doing that, not really value added work, he gets all that time back. And is it perfect? No. Is it less perfect than Excel? No, it's way more perfect than what we were doing. Let's take a minute and celebrate that really, really quantifiable benefit that we've just delivered. And let's think about what's next. We don't have to stop here. We haven't arrived anywhere, right? The world keeps turning, the business keeps evolving, our solution needs to evolve with it. What's the next thing we want to do? But what we've done today, with all of its warts, is still a success. Let's make sure we take the time while we're identifying things that could have gone better. The things that could have gone better should help us plan for tomorrow. But let's make sure that we do take some time today for the things that we've delivered and the success that we've had, whether it was blowing it out of the water or squeaking over the finish line.
Isn't that such a fascinating play when you consider how sometimes when things erupt into our world and we're like, we shouldn't be here. Ask ourselves, where else would we be here? Where else would we be if we wouldn't be right here?
Yeah.
And what I often think about is, and we all know that to the exact degree that we're present is to the exact degree that we're going to see clearly what's directly in front of us. And what we see directly in front of us will allow us then to participate with it in a productive way. And so I don't think really, when we think about it, logically, it makes no sense to flee our existence, to flee where we currently are at, makes no sense. The only thing is, we tend to get into these places, these little cubby holes in our lives that make us go, we should be further, right? We should be further. We should be further. Now, let's go a little bit deeper into that, because sometimes, and I don't want to take this into a dystopic or anything like it, but sometimes there are moments when we're like, hey, listen, I don't really appreciate currently this quality of challenge. And we look at it going, actually, it seems problematic in our life. And again, we're not solving for removing problem in life, because that's the biggest problem, to think we should have no problem. The thing in life is we must choose the quality of challenges that we want to work with. And sometimes though, let's say yesterday, my vehicle got broke into. We went downtown Vancouver, somebody smashed the window. And so I'm going to have to call the insurance company. Is this something that I get really excited about and I can't wait to do? No, it's going to be just going through the motions, kind of boring. And so, we all deal with specific things that maybe don't entice us and don't energize us quite so much. At the same time, I think we need to always remember that we get to choose the quality of challenges in life long term. So, for example, we're on a podcast today. I chose this. I love podcasting. Again, this little incidental came up with the window. We'll get it cleaned up. No big deal. Now, that's a bit of a silly problem for me. I don't want to duplicate it. So next time I'm going to make sure our wallets are not laying on the dashboard. Basically, we had them laying in the cubby and they saw it and they broke it, right? So when you think about, and so just tapping into and tying together, when I asked the question, what does it mean to fail? One thing that you brought forward is that we must be wise and we must split out nuances and different kinds of failure. We can't just be failure 100% and then it goes to identity. I'm a horrible person. We must ask ourselves, what kind of failure is this? Secondly, we get to decide. What does it mean? We get to decide what it means. Okay, we get to decide, do we want to be here or do we want to be somewhere else? But when you think back to, this is a long question, I'm so sorry. When you think back to, how do you help people when they go, well, and maybe to your point on your partner, when you said, listen, I feel like we should be somewhere else. How do you empathize with that and not wrestle with and try to pull the person, convert them into your way of thinking, but actually realize that perhaps this is a benefit not only for him, but you as well, her and you as well?
I mean, I think that part of being able to recognize things that didn't go well and use them to fuel improvement, use them to fuel growth. Part of that is being able to separate what's going on from your emotions about what's going on. And this gets really tense. Like, it's really hard to do with a partner, right? Because this is a relationship wrapped up in emotion, and it can be wrapped in positive emotion and it can be wrapped in negative emotion. That's up to yourselves. But teasing out some of these emotions to get to, let's have a real conversation about what's going on and how we move forward. Part of it is, let's talk about what happened. What did you observe? What are you experiencing? I can talk about sort of what I observed and what I intended, but then part of me, I need to let go of what I intended, because what I intended no longer matters, right? What matters is what we do from here. And so if I think about, creating psychologically safe space in a relationship, I mean, funny story, a couple of weeks ago. So I use for my podcast, I use a service called Podmatch, which helps connect podcasters with podcast guests. And my husband says to me, "Hey, can I ask you a question?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Are you a Match.com subscriber?" And I was like, "What? No." My Podmatch subscription fees came through to our Mint account, like our financial aggregator, as a Match.com charge. And I was like, this is not funny. Like, this is, if we don't have psychological, so a couple of things that a person can do in that situation. My husband could look at this and say, I now see evidence of things that make me scared. And I'm going to take my fear, and I'm not going to address it, but I'm going to be very suspicious. We're not going to talk about it. He could say, I'm going to ask about this, and I'm run the risk of hearing something I don't want to hear. Or he asks about it, and it is in fact this like super benign thing, right? He knows I podcast. That's not a secret. When we live in environments of psychological safety, we can identify things that look wrong and call them out. And we can have a conversation about them. This was a super benign conversation. Not all conversations in my relationship, in other people's relationships, are like that. But being in an environment where we can have calm and relaxed conversations, because by the same token, my response could have been, no, why would you think that of me? Are you seriously? And now we're having an emotional argument. It's not actually even about the charge. Taking emotions out of what's happening, out of the conversation, and really focusing on the facts and focusing on what we do next to make things better. It can be super hard, especially with a partner, but my experience has been that's 100% required if you're going to have an environment of psychological safety at home. Same thing at work. If I see something that didn't go right and I need to bring it up to one of my subordinates, let's pull the emotions out of it. I know you worked really hard on this. I know you're disappointed that you got this response. Let's pull the emotions out, talk about what happened, and talk about what we do next. And we're not, again, I keep going back to this term criminalization, but if you've ever been in an environment that really punishes failure, criminalization is 100% it. If you have a status report that goes green, 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 red, and all of the conversations are about whose fault it is and why they shouldn't even be in this organization, you've 100% criminalized failure, and you spent no time figuring out what you do next. So pulling emotions out and trying to get to the heart of things in a calm and fact-based way is really one of the foundational building blocks of psychological safety and of being able to address failure and misunderstanding.
I love that. Speak to us a little bit. Why do we tend to avoid failure? Like, what perceptions do we have that are built in, it seems like, where we have this hard drive to desire not to experience failure whatsoever? And to that point, maybe you can bring into this question what just happened between you and your husband, right? Because I think each and everything we do in life is an opportunity for failure. He could have spoke up. He did. And when he did, he had to embrace that there may be failure. He didn't choose to avoid it, right? He chose instead to face it. Go ahead. Why? Yeah, go ahead.
No,
avoid?
finish.
No, I'm listening.
Say it again.
Why do we tend to avoid it? And what do you think your husband needed to be about in the moment for him not to avoid, but to actually face? And then you speaking up the same way. Anytime you speak up, you're facing the real opportunity, but failing. Anything that comes from you is an opportunity.
We are in the habit of overestimating sort of the consequences of, first of all, overestimating the magnitude of failure, and then overestimating the consequences of that failure.
Especially if we think that we are failures and somebody figure it out, and we're thinking, look, it's all coming home to roost. I am this. And we're like, that's to your pointing earlier. If we've decided that's who we are, then we're looking for evidence. We're looking for evidence. We're looking. It's not even what they're doing. We're saying, whatever you do, whatever, you shake my hand in a little bit of a wrong way, I will think that you're telling me I'm a failure. Right? Go ahead. Yeah.
And I think that we have ingrained in us from a very early age these habits of not setting, like not being noticed in a negative way, not drawing sort of the negative attentions of others, not standing out. We don't want other people to notice us in a negative way. And so oftentimes we temper what we're willing to say in order to protect ourselves in this way. And kids do it all the time, right? Like kids stop asking questions because they're afraid they're going to get branded as being dumb, right? Or as being annoying, right? That language didn't come from nowhere. And we've all experienced that, whether you're thinking about a time you experienced it as a kid, or you're thinking about a time you experienced it last week. Maybe you didn't ask your doctor, maybe you didn't ask your car mechanic all of the questions you needed to ask to understand what was going on because you didn't want to look dumb. That's not about what's happening there, right? That's about your perception of yourself. You know, if you ask, you can interview shop floor workers about process improvements, and they've got ideas. And then you can ask them, well, have you shared any of those ideas with management? And the answer a lot of times is no. When you ask them why, you're like, well, because I got kids in college and I need to keep this job. If you then ask them, do you have a history? Is there a history in this organization of firing people for speaking up? Sometimes the answer comes back and it's like, no, we don't fire anybody. So you know that we don't fire people here. Like it's a very safe environment, but you're still coming into it with this fear of being pushed out, this fear of being rejected for speaking up. And so that's the nature of an environment that's not psychologically safe. And so when we think about, how do we get over that? How do we, in this example with my husband, how does he come to a place where he feels like he can ask this question instead of sort of holding on to this question and then like telling himself stories about what's going on that may or may not be true? It's got to come from a place of, first, is there other evidence that like these other stories are true? Probably not. In this case, no. So does this potential story that we're building, is there actually evidence that this could be the case? And what's the level of psychological safety in the relationship? If I bring this up, is the conversation going to go immediately personal, or are we going to have a fact-based conversation? Where we bring things up and we can have fact-based conversations, it means that we can clear up misunderstandings. It means that where there are things that we can be doing better, where there are failures, we can work productively on them and work constructively on them. And so, again, pulling emotions out, thinking about focusing and anchoring the conversation on the topic, on the work, and not personalizing things, right? These are the ways that we navigate through potentially difficult conversations. And then also having, we have sort of a number of things that we'll say when things do start to get, like when I do start to bring in emotions, right? or he does start to bring in emotions, conversation pausers, right? You can say, hey, this is a really important conversation, but I'm having a lot of emotions right now and I need to take a pause. If you're recognizing yourself like spinning up a lot of emotions, it's okay to acknowledge that and to press pause so that you can come back to the conversation later, right? And I would encourage you to identify when that later is, but come back to it later when you can be more relaxed, more calm, let the emotional tidal wave sort of move on and come back and refocus. Having language that is understood and agreed for taking a pause in a conversation means that emotions that start to build can be identified and acknowledged. And it's not a question of muscling through those emotions. It's a question of rebalancing.
So to your thought of not muscling through, it seems to me like this. So there you are, and not to make this personal for you, but there you are.
I've told a personal story.
Yeah. Thank you. That's fantastic. It's just, authentic and vulnerable. I really appreciate that. So there you are, your identity one, and there's identity two. There's these two people, these two humans that are doing this life. And something comes up, your husband sees on the statement probably or whatever, or this match.com, right? And he's like, what is this? What is this? Now, to your point on why do we tend to want to avoid failures is because, let's be honest, who likes to deal with difficult things? Not many people. The only thing is difficult things will make you stronger. Difficult things where you get all your courage from. It's where you get all of your highs and your low, and you feel this amazing emotional juice. Difficulties is actually, to some degree, is what we're made for. Therefore, it's what if we lean into, appreciate most, right? And so when I think about your husband, these two individuals, he's one, you're the other. We can argue that maybe you're a safe place for him to express and voice, meaning that he'd have to be okay with failure because of you're a developed human, emotionally developed human. The only thing is, let's just spin this around. In the moment, he recognized that he is individual this one and you're individual the other one. So you're always shifting, just like he's always shifting. And so it seems to me that we, as individuals, like him, he had to make a decision. I don't know who my wife will be in this moment, but I am going to address something that will be difficult. And guess what? I will be okay whether it works out or not. And I will choose to celebrate in the fact that I walked up to something difficult. I chose to language it. And I could choose to reflect with empathy how the other person responded. But again, the key thing is that he as a person had to say, I will do this, not if the other person's safe. Because in life, for us to get forward, we have to initiate. We can't just wait to have somebody throw us something and then we respond. We have to choose to initiate. And I think initiation is when something is going on, we're feeling something or something's happening in the environment, and we have an invitation to react. And of course, that's often survival mechanism, so that doesn't help. Then we have the invitation and the nudging to respond. And I think that's better. But I think, and I have this little play, and that is actually all of life, if we're leaders, the leaders of our own lives, that is. Leading other people, that comes later if we wish, but we first need to lead our own life. But everything in life is one big initiation. So it's like, actually, your husband says, this is what happens. This is what I see on the statement. I feel like maybe reacting, bad idea. Responding, I could. But initiating is to take all of what's happening, including how I feel, which is how he felt in the moment, and bringing that to the surface without criminalizing you. So he's doing the difficult work. He's realizing he's probably going to be okay either or if you say this or that. And he's choosing not to kick the can down the road. Talk to us for a second. What have you observed in your life when you have refused to deal with what could be failure, and so you just push it away, push it away, push it away? Does it typically get worse when you kick the can down the road like this? Does it build and get worse? And I'm not going to speak from his perspective, but think about for you, any area in life, what tends to happen when we kick it down the road? What are our chances to ever utilize failure well?
If you're not taking advantage of the opportunity to review what's going well and what's not going well, and to think about it in a constructive way, then the behaviors that you have, you will continue to exhibit those behaviors.
Mm-hmm.
Growth requires us to identify a disconnect between the desired state and the current state, and then to proactively do something about that. You know, I've had members of my teams that really struggled with attention to detail, right? And you get to a place where it's like, you now are deteriorating not only your credibility, but my credibility. So when we acknowledge A, that we've got an issue around attention to detail, and if we can, then B, what are we going to do about it? And just trying harder isn't going to fix it, right? Like, I have a bunch of kids. I can tell you that if you're trying to have a baby, if you're trying to deliver a baby and you're just clenching your jaw tighter, that's not going to work, right? There are other things you need to be doing to deliver that child. If you are trying to work on if you're trying to work on something at work and you don't have a plan, then you're not really working on it. You're just sort of hoping it gets better because you want it to. So, and coming up with that plan can be it can make somebody very vulnerable. It's kind of hair raising to do. But once you've come up with the plan, now you're working on getting better at things in a very tangible way. And if the thing that you're doing isn't working, then we can talk about how to adjust the thing you're doing to get better. We can bring this conversation, anchor it in actions and effort, as opposed to having it feel emotionally anchored in like who you are as a person or as an employee, all of this sort of very freighted attachment to identity, right? If you're working on your attention to detail, it has nothing to do with your identity. It has to do with the way you're working. So let's talk about the way you're working, how that needs to change, and what you're going to do to get from A to B, and how we're going to course correct. Staying in those tangible actions keeps us forward facing and helps keep us from getting lost in that swirl of emotion.
How do you comfortably begin to onboard failure? Meaning, how do you just become comfortable with failure? And how do you, in essence, start leading into not only becoming comfortable, but start enjoying failure? And I'm not looking to convert here.
Yeah.
I'm not looking to convert negative to positive. I'm just literally being like, hey, listen, if all of life is the good news, then how is this good news?
I think what you've got to do is you've got to normalize conversations about things that could have gone better. And you do that in a couple of ways. One of them is to be really intentional about having those conversations with others, right? About, my boss and I leave a meeting, like an important meeting, and then we sit down, we have a dedicated time to sit down and talk about how did that go? What could have gone better? And what should I be doing to remediate something that didn't go well in this particular instance? And how should I be thinking about the way I present or the way I go about this kind of work in the future? So taking a moment and being really intentional about setting aside the time to identify things that could have gone better. And then when you're talking to others, when you start on a new project or you start on a new endeavor, or you find out there's somebody who's done something very similar to what you're trying to do, go talk to them. And when you talk to them, ask them, what is it that you wish you'd done differently? Because what you wish you'd done differently, that's a thing that you failed at and you had to fix it. But we aren't calling it failure. We're using different language. It's a little softer. But what we're doing is we're normalizing conversations and transparency about things that we wish had gone differently, things that didn't go so hot. And when I share with you things that didn't go so hot in my experience, I'm telling you, these are things that happened and I don't want them to happen for you. I want you to learn from my experience, but I'm also not like laying my soul bare. For me to be able to say out loud to you, this is the stuff that I wish had gone differently, I've already now taken these things that happened and unhooked my emotions from them, taken them as a constructive opportunity. When you start to normalize conversations about what could have gone better and what could have gone differently, you help people unhook their emotions from events. And you help people understand that not only is it safe to ask, like what could have gone better, but it's also safe to share. And it's safe to talk about what pitfalls there are around us. What failures have you experienced? And how do we learn from each other? Normalizing those conversations is really critical.
Seems to me like normalizing has a lot to do with appreciating. And when I think about, and back to the what I mentioned earlier about benign and hostile, I think if we, again, we seem to appreciate just where we got it wrong and where it didn't work out. And we apologize to ourselves and others that, sorry that I messed up. However, when I think about a true innovator, an innovator always looks for the good. It looks for the good first, and this is not, if there's a weed, let's just say it's an amazing flower. Listen, if it's a weed, pull it out. The only thing is, the human being tends not to want to take any forward movement and choose new risks, new opportunities, if it doesn't appreciate that it just took action. And so what do you think happens when you take action? We must normalize that anything can happen. Hard baked into action. Go ahead. Mm-hmm.
It is hard to lean into action, but it is hard to lean into action. But when we build this practice, if we find ourselves in a place that doesn't accept this kind of a practice, first of all, that may not be the place for us. It may be that it's time for us to move on to a place where we can embrace growth. And nobody on no job description ever. And there are certainly organizations that operate this way, but even those organizations don't post in job descriptions like, this is kind of a thankless job and you will be completely criminalized for every misstep. No one says that, but they're out there. And when you can recognize that that's the environment that you're in, that's a toxic environment. And it's time to move on from that toxic environment, because while you can lean into your personal practice, you can try to protect your team and build the right environment for your team, there are places where it's not okay to learn and grow. And unless you really like that, you should go find a place that it is okay to learn and grow. Self-compassion
Without, the human doesn't move. It just doesn't move. We can wait all day long for other people to give us compassion. We have to be self-compassionate from within. We have to appreciate. We have to find a way to not throw away these gems, these experiences that we have. And we have to find a way of not labeling, but instead utilizing. Because without, what we're doing constantly is we're eliminating. And if we're eliminating anything, meaning if we don't, activate our ability to find a deep appreciation for actually thankful for just really exactly how it went. Like when we, like you say, when you talk to the people, to really lean in and be like, honestly, I wish things went differently, but in that moment, I'm very thankful for how they were because that got me here. I think we have to, when I say think, I mean, I've tried on a few different angles. I'll tell you something. I ended up in a story of not the best time of my life many years ago. And it was just simply me being, and back to what I said earlier, awareness is not being self-critical. I was so critical. I was just looking for constantly, thinking always about how I could have done different, wishing and hoping and praying. And trust me, I did lots of all of those, wishing, hoping, and praying. Then it's like taking the control back, which is to lean in and go, actually, nothing is wasted in what happened here. Everything belongs. So speaking to everything belonging, transformation requires integration. How do you help your people really appreciate, which means they're going to appreciate both the benign and the hostile within themselves? How do you help people to integrate all of it instead of trying to eliminate? How do you do that for your people?
I feel like a broken record. I keep coming back to this psychological safety,
Love
right?
it. Please.
But in an environment where we can have we can have conversations, provide feedback unencumbered by personalized emotion. It gives people the space, the breathing room to exist in almost an experimental space, right? I know this is new. I know this is different. I'm trying something different. I'm taking a risk. Acknowledge the risk that the people around you are taking. Acknowledge it by supporting them and acknowledge it out loud. Be like, hey, I know this is risky and I'm proud of you for doing it. I know this is risky.
That's beautiful.
But I think it's the right move. And I'm here for it. I'm here to support you. We're not in a place where you're taking a risk by yourself.
Wow. Yeah, that's, think about where in life is empathy not the thing to be about? How often in life don't we just move about? We're about our work and we observe other people doing stuff. But here's the thing. We don't often say a whole bunch other than, hey, how was your day? Oh, should we celebrate? You had a bunch of wins? Let's celebrate. Instead, how about choosing to celebrate? Choosing to celebrate when you initiate the engagement with another human and you say, listen, I don't know if you detect this. I just want you to know that for you to speak up takes risk. So you can literally thank and empathize and appreciate people just living their life, saying nothing. For example, speaking nothing and just observing. You know how much risk it is just to observe and say nothing? There's risk of failure constantly. So think about it. If we would just come alongside the human and support and be like, hey, listen, you're making this choice right now. Maybe it's not my choice, none of my business. The only thing that I want you to know is to some degree, you're choosing to activate a risk for you. And that's a beautiful thing. And really what we're doing is we're encouraging, not through any leadership or not through any teaching. It's just we're saying, hey, listen, you're engaged in something here. It's called risk. Good on you. And I think that encourages the soul to want to take on more risk, perhaps, if they want.
It encourages us to reach for the boundaries of our comfort.
Beautiful.
And perhaps boundaries of what we can and the boundaries of what we want to do.
That's so good. Share with us where personally, and I ask this question every now and again, where personally you struggle deeply, and please talk in relation to failure. So if you think about, listen, you got a lot of things going for you, you got a lot of areas, and this one area, it just seems like it keeps coming back. And you may have shared the story, you may have not, but if you'd be so willing, we'd really appreciate, because we all want to have this real understanding of who you are, and we want to see your humanity. Where do you struggle when it comes to failure? And you're like, you just bumping into it, and it seems like no matter what you do, you can't figure it out. And the more answers you want to develop, the more questions you have. It's just not. So give us that real place in your life.
So one of the things that, and my mother gets on me for this all the time, one of the things that I struggle with sometimes is letting it go. The situation is over. I've left that job, not talking to those people anymore. There's no reason. The only place this conflict or this failure lives anymore is in my continual retreading of it. And it may be that the people that were involved don't even remember this situation anymore. They've put it, they're done. They've moved on. They have more important things to do. And I have been known to reach into my bucket of rage and just sort of relive the emotional experience of a really negative situation. And it's a terrible habit, right? If I'm making a long drive and I need to stay awake, it's a great way to stay awake because I'll just relive. And when you're furious, you're not falling asleep. But I can tell you, it's not doing anything for the quality of my interactions today. It's not doing anything for my ability to learn and grow and even be present in what I'm doing today. And so this is an area that where I need to be vigilant, right? It's not an acute failure. Acute failures, I'd like to say that acute failures are sort of easier to let go of, but this is sort of a recurring, this is my turning an acute failure into a recurring failure. And replaying this stuff, revitalizing some of that anger, some of those emotions, some of those feelings, it's not solving anything. It's not helping me get better.
Mm-hmm.
I have much better comebacks in those conversations than perhaps I did in real life.
Mm-hmm.
But they're also not serving me. I have nowhere to deploy this stuff. And so I would say that when I think about failure for myself, one of the things I have to remind myself is not just to acknowledge the failure, not just to think about what you're going to do next, but then to let the thing that happened be in the past and live and work and energize yourself in what comes next. And what comes next is informed by this thing that happened, by this failure. But that failure doesn't have to be front and center for you. And so, I mean, there have been jobs that I've left that I can still rage about. I, for a long, long time, raged about losing the student government president election in the 7th grade, a long, long time. To this kid that, like, I can't believe he won, right? That didn't serve anyone. And it certainly didn't, like, this kid didn't care. This was beyond his caring. So all I was doing is hurt myself with this stuff. And it kept me from thinking about what I could have done differently. So this is a development area for me that I need to work on.
I totally hear you. I know listeners, I don't know if you're picking up, but there's many things that are coming to the surface for me. And something that just comes to heart for me is so often in my life, when something comes back and it's reoccurring, and I don't bring new life to it, I don't bring new safety to it in a different way, then what happens in my life is I try to solve things. And it seems to me like no matter how we do life, we're constantly evolving. So instead of solving, we can also lean into evolving. You know, when I think about the conversation of anger, and so for listeners, you out there, you know who you are. I know who I am, and I also know that I once was fueled by anger, and so I'm listening to what you're saying, right, Alyssa? And you're talking about, there's actually this anger that you keep coming back to, and it just seems to be reoccurring. The only thing is, we just want you to know that and though we don't know you that well. For me, perhaps I know you a little better than the audience knows you, but we can see that you're moving with your anger. Your anger is evolving. You have built a relationship with it. There's a little podcast that I heard last weekend. It's from Terry Crews, and he's interviewed by I forget. Anyway, Terry was talking about when he was a child, his dad would knock out his mom on a regular, as a reoccurring happening. And when he became a teenager, he decided that someday his dad was going to have to pay the price. And fast forward, he was 30, he was married, he had children. And so his parents came home for Christmas, and he calls it the Christmas from hell. And he says, we left the house, and dad had said he was coming over and he was going to be good. He was not going to do a lot of drinking. His mom was addicted to religion, and his dad was addicted to alcohol. And those two combinations didn't work out so well. And so here's to the point of evolving anger, right? First, he was solving for something. He was solving for, let's get it out of me. And so what happened is, back to this story, 30 years old, his uncle calls him, and actually his aunt calls him and says, hey, listen, your mom is here, and her tooth is all sideways. Your dad capped her pretty good, like clocked her pretty good. So Terry turns the car around, comes back home, parks the car in the front of his house, walks in just before he walks into the door, says to his family in the car, you stay here, I'll be right back. Enters the house and says, everybody get out, but says, Dad, you stay in. Everybody gets out of the house. They leave. And it's just him and his dad in his house. And he says to his dad, Dad, so what happened here? And his dad made some, excuses all over again. And then just kind of like brushed him aside with his hand, just said, hey, just go away. And Terry just goes, boom, clocked him one. And he goes, we fought it out, wrestled it out, up and down the stairs. My dad was a bloody mess when it was said and done. And what's interesting is the anger. He goes, I thought it would solve something. It did nothing for me. There was no movement. I had said all my life, when I get this opportunity to settle the score, I'll feel good. It did nothing. it's just violence. It's redemptive violence, right? And so instead of reconciliation, it's redemptive violence. And so then story moves along. Fast forward a year or two, actually it was 7, his wife and children left him because he had these anger issues, wasn't evolving it. He's working on himself, therapy and counseling and different things. And there's a situation where he's at this function and somebody who's leading the function grabs his crotch. And he's like, oh my goodness. Doesn't flinch. So he's developed, doesn't respond. And he's waiting to initiate, but he's wondering how so. And then this individual realizes Terry's not flinching, so that he does it again, grabs his crotch again. And Terry's like, this isn't okay. But he chooses to utilize instead of eliminate his anger. And this individual, through court, was basically lost his job. This was the head of the function. Said, well, you can't get me out of this position. Well, Terry found a way of getting it out. But it's interesting. He utilized his anger. And so for those of us here who are listening, and back to what I was saying earlier, we know who we are. Most of us run on fear and anger more than we do on love. Ultimately, great change happens if either we utilize fear and anger or love. We can choose. Maybe some of you are getting a little sick of using anger. Fair enough. The only thing is sometimes it's like be angry and sin not. The Bible talks about many things. Good books talk about many things. Bible is one of them. Again, be angry and sin not. Think about Terry Crews. He utilized his anger for the good. For the good. It's like you say, Alyssa, you sometimes think about this president thing. You lost that. And actually, it provides fuel for you, for good on you, right? So instead of us trying to solve, maybe we just want to evolve our anger, because anything that is good has life in it. We must continue breathing life into it. Let it just move. So I love that. I love how you talk about failure, and I think it's some pretty deep work that you've involved yourself with, and the fact that you are building your framework in your entire business around failure. That's some pretty juicy stuff. Like, who thinks that's the sexy thing to build around? I think that takes a lot of heart, and takes a lot of mission. It takes a lot of trust. It takes an experience with what it feels like to feel like you are a failure. Like, clearly, that's likely why you chose it, right? And weekly wins and losses, I chose it for a reason. Why? Because I felt like I was losing all the time. I felt like I was a failure constantly. But if we bring it more into a place where we can debate the tension instead of being like, nope, I am that. I am just the worst of the worst. Let's let it be a moment and an experience that we can appreciate. Alyssa, if you would leave us with any final words of wisdom, what might they be when it comes to failure, or just anything that comes to heart?
I mean, it's a little tongue in cheek, but it's one that I use all the time. And what I'll tell you is, don't hide a dead fish in your desk. Everybody knows it's there. It's just going to smell worse and worse. And you're going to spend more and more of your time trying to cover it up for no reason. When something goes wrong, acknowledge it. Everyone else can see it. You're not hiding from anybody. When we acknowledge it and we can move forward and get better, you get the dead fish out of your office entirely, right? So don't hide a dead fish in your desk. Acknowledge the things that didn't go so hot. Acknowledge them with others and use them as an opportunity to learn.
Build a relationship with failure. Have a conversation with somebody about failure today. Express it. Feel it. Realize you're going to be okay. It's an experience. It's a moment. It's a gift. It's something for you to participate with. It's not for you to try to hide in the drawer in the back of your office desk. My friend, that stinky fish, it ain't no good. You gotta find a way of working with it, right?
That's right.
Yeah, get it out, meaning utilize it. Don't eliminate, get it out of yourself, talk about it, experience it. Awesome. Alyssa, where can people find you?
So you can find me on LinkedIn, or you can visit my website at www.blueswiftconsulting.com. I also have a podcast called The Change Artist, where we talk to leaders about sort of leading and following through change. So, and that's on all of the podcast directories.
You keep that real nice and simple. I love that. Hey, failure is such a wide topic. I think we've been stretched. You keep the rest simple, which is nice. Thank you. So good. Awesome. So there you go, folks. You know where, if you want to learn more about Alyssa's work, go to her website and you'll find all of those things, her podcast, her work, her platform. And of course, I'll be posting this stuff in the show notes so you can find her there. So thanks for, joining today, Lisa. And perhaps we'll do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Thanks again, James.
Take care.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed that little interplay. If you liked the podcast episode, let us know by subscribing, leaving a little review, and sharing with a friend as you feel appropriate. Honestly, the guests that I host on this show, they love the feedback, and I personally love knowing that you're listening. So whether you choose to work with me as a guide or not, and that's your guide or not, that's simply great. Why, you ask? Well, because you're obviously one of those that's listened to the very end of this podcast. You've clearly made a decision to invest in yourself, and honestly, how isn't that just the best news? So if you decide you need and or want to get unstuck by activating your creativity and inner resources, if you want to see things clearly, if you want to get to your next level, if you want to live with vibrant energy and passion, simply go to www.jameshepner.com for one-on-one coaching, and or go to www.weeklywinsandlosses.com for the no-charge Friday noon Global Community Weekly Wins and Losses video call. So again, I thank you for investing in yourself. See you next time. My sincere hope is that you've gleaned a few nuggets for yourself and a few pieces of interest that help you move forward in your unique journey. So again, I thank you for joining me here. This is James Hepner clocking out. Until next time, peace out, rock up.